right, on we go to current challenges for American orchestras. Michael Naess, our presenter today, has an in-depth knowledge of his subject gained in over 3 decades as a marketing and fundraising professional for organizations such as the Kennedy Center for Performing Arts, Lyric Opera of Chicago, Carnegie Hall, Dallas Symphony, and Grand Rapids Symphony. He became president and CEO of the Holland Symphony Orchestra last June. Michael earned his bachelor's degree in Renaissance and Baroque choral music and performance from Bowdoin College in Maine, but his musical interests are wide-ranging. An organist, he was also known to have played drums in a few rock bands in high school and college. And you might be interested to know that Michael is a former marathon runner who once completed the Empire State Building stair climb, that's 96 floors, in 14 minutes. That feat ranked him in the top 100 runners. But ultimately for Michael, it's all about the music. He says, watching people fall in love with music is my favorite part of the job. So welcome, Michael Naess.
Thank you. Wow, what an introduction. Thank you very much, HASP, for having me. This is an honor. And a bigger thank you to all of you. There's some board members in the room. There's some major donors, subscribers. You're the reason I'm here. You're the reason this orchestra survives. So a big thank you before we dive into the challenges. So a little bit about my history. Obviously, that was a great introduction, so I won't have to spend too much time on this slide. I will say that what got me into music was my mother and father, right? They started piano lessons early. They brought me to the Houston Symphony Orchestra. I was born in Houston, Texas. And from then on, it kind of grew and grew, from singing in a cappella groups to learning the piano and the pipe organ for a couple years in college. So it was deep rooted, my passion for music. If someone ever says to you that they work in administrative capacity at an orchestra, it's not because of the pay. It's because they love the music, right? So just to be sure you know that. The second thing is that arts marketing and DCM are telemarketing companies that back in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s would hire people to get on the phone and call to sell subscriptions and raise money over the phone for these orchestras. And the Kennedy Center was the one who hired me through one of these vendors. And I sat at a desk and called hundreds of people, hours and hours and hours, trying to sell subscriptions. Back then, they were 7 concert packages. So I'd be calling out of the blue. I don't know these people at all. I'd be calling them and explaining to them about what Rostropovich has curated for their season and try and sell them the best seats possible. And it's very challenging to cold call hundreds of people per hour who you don't know. All you have is a little card with their name and what they bought. That's it. Nowadays, it's a little different. You have a lot more information. But that kind of sales training really helped me later in my career. And I had the opportunity to work at Carnegie Hall for 8 years. I mean, talk about a really prestigious organization with a massive budget and over 800 events a year go on in there. So that was fantastic. And then also Orpheus Chamber Orchestra, that's a conductorless orchestra. Orpheus, you hear them on the radio all the time. They're one of the most recorded orchestras. But what was so interesting in my work with Orpheus was they're conductorless, meaning that the full orchestra decides what they're going to play, how they're going to play it. So when you go to their concerts, there is no conductor, right? The concert master does a lot of that work, but otherwise it's very democratic. And so it was fascinating to work with those musicians as well. But now I'm here. Very lucky to be here. Kay Walvert has done an amazing job over 35 years of creating the Holland Symphony Orchestra. And not a day goes by that I'm not impressed by what has been accomplished over those 35 years. So thank you to Kay as well for all of her service. All right, so let's talk about the first and biggest challenge right now. Classical music audiences are aging. This is no surprise to us, right? When we go and we sit down in these concert halls, you are going to see mostly people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. If you look at this chart, you'll see that from left to right, you're going through the generations. You'll see that it's extremely hard, at least for classical programs, to get younger audiences in the door. Almost 60% of classical concert attendees are over 65, 60%, right? So 6 out of 10, compared to 25% at the turn of the century. And the reason for this decline is mostly because of education. Back in the 60s and 70s and early 80s, the schools had music programs, and you had to take a music program or learn the recorder or learn how to read music. And so music was instilled in your education by the middle schools and high schools by the time you left. That is no longer the case. A lot of budget cuts were made, and for example, in 2008, funding for music education decreased by 7%. And what I found amazing is that in some states, over 40% of public schools don't have music programs. I mean, it's scary in my opinion, that slashes have been made. And it's a ripple effect, right? Because if 20 years ago they started cutting, right, those people who are in their 40s and 30s now, they never had music education in school. So to them, music isn't so much of a core value in their daily lives. To them, they just turn the radio station on or they go to YouTube and they watch it. They haven't really embraced the magic of live classical music, right? And so this chart really shows you just the decline that happened. And so that's why you see so many orchestras going into schools and bringing the music to the schools, right? Our Link Up program is a big part of that, but also the musicians going in and doing lectures in the classrooms, because so many of these music teachers retired or quit because there was no place for them. So orchestras are trying desperately to bring music back into the schools, but because of the tiny budgets of these orchestras, there's just limited resources to do that, right? But that's one of the reasons why you're seeing this aging effect. Is it's the ripple effect of people in their 30, they're now 30 and 40 who didn't have that music in school. So it's not important to them, right? They don't place it as high as we do in this room, or at least most of us do in this room. There's a negative stigma to classical music and to going to a concert hall. When I talk to people in their 20s and 30s and I say, oh, hey, you know, I want to bring you to Carnegie Hall. I want to bring you to Dallas Symphony. I want to bring you to Holland Symphony. Oh, really? But isn't that just a bunch of old white people? And aren't they going to shush me if I say anything? And do I have to sit there and stand still? And they are afraid, most people are afraid to go to these concerts because they worry that it's going to be boring, or it's only for wealthy, educated white people, or it's very antisocial. They don't get to talk to anyone. There's a lack of contact and engagement. They can only clap when they're told, which actually is interesting because back in Beethoven and Mozart's days, they would actually clap if they felt moved while the music is going. That shift only happened in kind of the 70s and 80s, where we decided we are going to create an etiquette where it's sit down, be quiet, absorb, and then clap when you're told. So breaking down these negative stigmas is very difficult to do. And that's what one of the things we need to do in order to create a space that younger people feel is safe to go to. And many people have done that. For example, the tactics to attract young people, movies are a huge thing now. The New York Philharmonic did all 6 Star Wars movies in a row, in the row that they were published, and they sold out every single seat, and they made a lot of money. And the reason why is their lacks of visual, right? When we go to a symphony orchestra concert, and we're sitting there and we're seeing the musicians play, but there's nothing visual that is stimulating us. With the movie plus orchestra, you're watching the movie, but the music, that live orchestral music, is being played by live musicians on the stage. And that only came about in the last 10 years, really. It is very expensive to put on these productions, because you have to pay for the rights to screen the movie. You have to pay for the rights for the arrangements, because of course, right, you know, John Williams ain't cheap. And so all of that music has been rescored for orchestra plus film, so that way the audio, the film, and the talking and the blasters and all that stuff that's still there, but the music itself is being played by the orchestra, so they have to have special scores for that music. Um, Pops programs have grown, and you'll see in a couple slides I'll show you, but the growth that a lot of orchestras will boast about is not in classical, it's in the pops category. And a lot of them have partnered with rock bands to do orchestral shows about rock bands. So, for example, if you know who Led Zeppelin is, or the Police, or the Beatles, or the Rolling Stones, orchestration has been made so that they can play that music with full orchestra. And that brings in younger people because they know the music and they know it's going to be kind of upbeat. And so those concerts sell a lot better than, our normal Beethoven, Bach, Brahms, Bartok. Um, Secondly, or the third thing, right? So you've got the movies with music, you've got the pops programs that are kind of a melding of rock bands and mainstream bands with full orchestra. The third is kind of a Cirque du Soleil combination. And we did a couple of these in Dallas and in Baltimore, and they sold really well. It's basically a circus troupe that partners with the orchestra, and they set up the trapeze, they set up the places where the acrobats are going to do their thing all in front of the orchestra, and then the orchestra performs certain music that goes along with the acts of these circus performers. And so again, there's a visual component with the music that sells very well, but again, more expensive because you're paying the same cost to have that full orchestra and conductor there. Plus, you got to pay all the acrobats and the aerialists and bring all their equipment in and hang stuff from, so that they can do the trapeze. So again, these ideas help attract younger audiences, but all of them come with a stiff price tag. And it's all ornamentation to add to the music, add a visual. So that's currently how we're trying to address the aging audience challenge. Engagement and accessibility, right? So some of these may be buzzwords now, but the idea of breaking down the barrier between those people on the stage and those people in the audience. Why can't you go to the harpist and say, hey, wow, how did you do this? Or how did you do that? Or why can't you go to the cellist and say, hey, what was the hardest part in there? The idea of having access to musicians is a concept that a lot of orchestras are rolling out so that way you see these musicians as humans and as fellow colleagues, and you're going to be drawn in by getting to know them as people, right? Versus just they're up there on that stage and you're down in the audience and you don't get any contact. There's that invisible wall between you and them. So the idea of meet the artist and conductor events is very popular, and it helps in fundraising tremendously. Brewery concerts, right? A lot of people are putting little brass ensembles together and going to breweries with the understanding that it's going to be a boisterous environment. They're going to talk over the music. They're going to cheers, and you're going to have clinking glasses and chatter. But the idea is brand awareness is there, meaning you're hearing a live brass band in that brewery, and it's a safe space. The young people are already there. You're just bringing the music to them and creating a social environment. It's already a social environment. So those have been successful. Pop-up concerts in parks and shopping malls. And in a few slides, I'm going to show you an example of a flash mob, meaning musicians who all appeared at the same time in a mall to perform so that people would realize just how magic the music is. Right. So I'll show you some of those. Young professional events, right? So a lot of times orchestras will say, hey, after the concert, come out in the lobby. We'll give you a free beer ticket or a free wine ticket, and we're going to give a lecture on this or that for young professionals, meaning people who are kind of culture vultures. They want to know more about this art form, this live orchestra art form, but you're going to have to entice them with something, a free beer, free glass of wine. They can walk around, stretch their legs, they could talk. Those types of young professional events are helpful in cultivating the next round of donors or the next round of subscribers. And then, of course, food and drink in the hall. Many performance halls have a policy of no food, no drink in there. Well, unfortunately, young people like to be able to to drink and have fun during concerts, right? I mean, if we told Van Andel Arena you're not allowed to have drinks, or imagine what would happen. They would shut down. Um, the idea of having food and drink in the hall needs to be considered for concert halls, right? A lot of them in New York City will have sippy cups, right, with the lids, so you don't, right, have any issues with spills. They'll have actually Carnegie Hall, their cough drops are wrapped in wax paper, so that it doesn't make any noise when you unwrap them. A lot of thought has gone into making these concert halls more accessible and more welcoming through food and drink and that type of stuff. Okay, so we're going to show a video of a flash mob that an orchestra did. This orchestra is the Wayzata Orchestra, Symphony Orchestra, and they are in Minneapolis. So let's see if we can cue this up here. It's about 7 minutes long, but I have a feeling all of you are going to recognize the music. So I hope you guys enjoyed that, right? I mean, it tears you up a little bit. That's the type of creativity we need to embrace. All different ages, all different backgrounds stopped and listened, right? They turned a mall into a concert hall, right? What a brilliant idea. And can you imagine all those people posting on their social media and their phones and streaming and, hey, mom, look what happened at the mall today, right? So that's the type of things we need to do. We need to break down the barriers that separate us from everyone else. And I mean us, I mean the classical music lovers out there and the musicians out there. That's not an easy thing to do. I mean, there's so many things they had to figure out. How are we going to get the instruments there? How do we have enough space, right? How do we coordinate that, right? And then payment, right? Musicians want to get paid, right? They're not all going to volunteer their time to do something like that. But that's something that really is a creative way, and I take my hat off to them for pulling it off. But that's the type of thing that really will bring people awareness to the power of orchestral music, live orchestral music. Great choice, right? Beethoven's Ode to Joy. So let's talk about another challenge, is high administration staff turnover, right? Most orchestras that I worked for 5 years ago don't have the same people working there. Why? Because they quit or they find better paying jobs. And the reason why is that most major symphony orchestras experience a 40 to 60% staff turnover per year. It is extremely hard to keep people in those roles. Why? Well, number one, they're doing the job of three people, right? Because as ticket sales dwindled, right, we shifted and said, okay, we're just going to have to raise more money, right? If people aren't going to buy the tickets and we can't rely on that income, we're going to have to ask people for more money. We're going to have to go and fundraise more, right? And we're going to have to tighten budgets. We're going to have to figure out how we can cut costs, right? So you drive the salaries down of those people. And does someone want to do the work, do three people's job for a third of the pay? No, they're not. The majority of the people that stay in administrative positions in orchestras are because they love the music so much, they're willing to put in the hours and to find money elsewhere because it's not coming from that job. Or they have income coming from another person, their spouse. Otherwise, they're out of there. They're overworked, they're underpaid. Also benefits. Most orchestras can't afford good health plans. So what they do is they pass on the cost to their employees. So not only are they coming to you and saying, hey, I know the salary's really low, and also you're gonna have to pay for your own healthcare. Right. I mean, if you think about the pendulum there, that's a lot of sacrifices you're making to make sure that orchestra music survives. So that's and then the fourth thing is, while those musicians get that roar of the crowd, you don't. You're running around the orchestra, the hall somewhere doing some boring administrative thing. You're not actually getting the people clapping for you and standing up, right? They're not going to run to you after the concert and be excited and say, oh, that was so great. Amazing job. No, you'll hear what went wrong for sure. Right? So for every 25 complaints you get one compliment. It is a very unrewarding job. Right. Ask Kay. She knows what I'm talking about. So that is a challenge. How do we find good people and keep them motivated and keep morale high when we're always on edge of where are we going to find the money? Are we going to make the budget? What's going to happen? Right. So that is a major challenge. Orchestras go through a lot of people. It's a revolving door. All right, let's talk about how orchestras have survived all of this turmoil and these challenges. So well, let's see. I'm going to look at on the right side and left side. So on the left is 2019, right? Pre-pandemic. On the right is as we come through the pandemic, right? So the big point of this slide is look at the increase in private support. We're putting more pressure on those individual donors to give because ticket sales plummet. And there are only three channels of funding for orchestras. There's your ticket revenue, there's your raised revenue, right? Your foundations, your corporate support, your individual major donors. And that's the challenge, is to balance budgets. We have put so much pressure on fundraising because ticket sales didn't come through as we'd want them to. And you could also see, endowments also drawing more on endowments. A lot of orchestras are leaning more heavily on their endowments than ever before. They're breaking the 4 to 6% rule, right? Usually the rule is you only draw 4 or 5, maximum 6% on your endowment. Orchestras that are in great health, very few of them, Holland Symphony is one of them, has a very strong endowment, and many years they didn't draw anything because they broke even and they said, hey, you know what? That's the success. We're not here to make money. We're here to break even. And if we break even, we're not going to touch that pile of money called your endowment. That's your safety net, right? So that's you're being fiscally responsible by not constantly dipping into the endowment. It's fine to draw 4 or 5, 6%, but if you go over that, basically what you're doing is you're saying we are not self-sustaining at all. We are actually going to start bleeding. So you can see just how big that percentage is of people giving money. Now let's look at your Holland Symphony in terms of the revenue breakdown. This information is from Michael Kaiser report. He did a huge audit, basically, of Holland Symphony Orchestra. It was paid for by the DeVos family, and it was really an amazing project. I enjoyed reading all of his work. If you don't know who Michael Kaiser is, he's one of the Yodas of orchestra management. He ran the Kennedy Center for a long time. The guy is a genius, and he really has devoted his life at work, or at least most of his work, to helping nonprofit performing arts organizations survive by drilling down into their data, by looking at their models and making adjustments to costs and revenue and that type of thing. So he did a full audit of Holland Symphony Orchestra over, was it 2 years, Kay? 2, 3 years? Yeah, 2 years, right? And this is what's interesting. If you look at the normal US orchestra where it says revenue fiscal year 19, you'll see that the private support portion is 43%. Now look at Holland Symphony. It's 54%. That is a massive amount of your revenue coming from your donors. And then if you look at performance revenue, the normal US orchestra has got about 34% of their budget is paid from ticket sales. If you go over to the right and look at Holland Symphony, it's 19%, right? One of the reasons why is ticket prices for Holland Symphony were extremely low. That's great for accessibility, but that puts more pressure on you to raise more money. So that's one of the vulnerabilities that Michael Kaiser found and called attention to. If you look at the other earned income, other earned revenue, 7%, 8%, that's fine. Endowments, 13 to 14%, that's fine. Government support, right? Holland Symphony got a decent amount of government support, at least back in 2019. That's good. I will touch on that in a later slide because that's in jeopardy as well now. But you can see just how vulnerable it is, because if you lose your top 10 donors, you are in real trouble. And it's dangerous to say every day, well, I've got those 10 people. I hope they give what they did last year, because if they don't, we're in trouble. So this is showing you the top 5 gifts, right? If you add up the top 5 donors, it's about $75,000. That's 19%, right? So from five channels, almost 20% of your revenue is coming from 5 channels. Again, vulnerability. Now, how do we become less vulnerable? The idea is to build more of those lower donors and elevate them into the higher giving categories, so that way you've got more people to cultivate, and those people will eventually be your top donors. It just takes time. It takes attachment to them. The other factor that's working against you is inflation. That person who gives you $100 every year, bless them, thank you. But after each year, that gift gets less and less in terms of impact. This will show you right here. Look at the change there, right? From 2019 to 2023, you're dropping 21% from trustees, 15% foundations, right? It's really hard to fight inflation. And it's very hard to tell a donor, hey, because of inflation, could you give 120 instead of 100 this year? That's not going to raise money. That's not going to warm their hearts, but it's the reality is that, their money's not going as far and your costs are going up a lot higher than you're bringing in the money, right? So economics is working against you. So that is a hard reality to face. So let's talk about how bigger organizations versus middle organizations versus the small guys, what's going on there in terms of ticket prices, right? Because if we don't want to be so vulnerable on our high-end donors, we got to make more money on our ticket sales. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to gradually raise ticket prices and look at it. Look what happened in 2019 to 2023, single ticket high prices, small organizations, 30% increase in price. Now, the smart way to do it is you look at what seats you sell the most of, because those are the prime seats, right? That's the prime real estate. That's what people want, right? They want their aisle seat. They want their front row seat. So logic tells you that that front row seat or that aisle seat should be a little more expensive than the last row stuck in the middle, right? That's what's happening now. Orchestras are now looking at their entire seating chart and saying, okay, which seats can we raise the price a little bit and people will still pay for it? And which seats do we have to drop it a little bit because those are always empty, right? People don't like to sit there. So that's what they're doing. So much so that they have what's called heat maps, which is really cool. They bring in the seating chart and then they show you how many times that seat is sold. Like that seat is sold 90% for 90% of our concerts, we can raise that price. That seat sold only 30% of our concerts, we might be able to lower that, right? So looking at those types of things, which is what the airlines did. I mean, everybody knows now that you're going to pay $30 more for that exit row or the bulkhead, right? They did that a long time ago. Orchestras are just slow to catch up, right? Because we have the nonprofit thinking on, right? Our nonprofit brain says, oh, we just want to break even. Well, sadly, most of the time you don't. So they have to start thinking, how can I make more money out of that earned revenue so I'm not constantly going to those top 5 donors to bail me out at the end of the year. The other thing that's happening is a decline in attendance. Now, the good news is that we are seeing an uptick in attendance now. People have now said, okay, the pandemic is behind us. We're going to go to live events now. But for a while there, they were slow to come back, very slow to come back. And again, a lot of organizations dug deeper into their endowments to cover the loss of those ticket sales. Luckily, we are now seeing an uptick, and that's where we have to capitalize on it. That's where we have to figure out, okay, we need creative programming. We need to work some pops concerts in there. We need some kind of special stuff like the flash mob. And we also need to look at those ticket prices and adjust so that we're bringing in more money for our product instead of just constantly asking for more money from our loyal supporters. Subscription, this is an interesting thing. Subscription is on the decline and it has been for years. And one of the theories is people don't like to commit. While there's a lot of us in this room who love our seat and we're going to renew it every year because we don't want anyone else sitting there, that's our seat. A lot of the younger generation doesn't think that way. They want to make the decision 48 hours in advance. Hey, honey, you want to go to the symphony? Yeah, in 2 nights. Okay, great. Let's buy a ticket. Right? Versus the subscriber. I mean, I'm one of them. I still have my box seat at Carnegie Hall. I've had that for 10 years. Right? And I renew it every year because guess what? When I go back to New York City, I want to sit there. Right? And I'll do it. The minute they open that gate, I will get online and I will subscribe. But I'm of the older mentality. The newer mentality is, what? No, I'll just wait, 48 hours and buy a single ticket. Right? So training people to think that way of purchasing early is very difficult because it's not a concept that the people in their 30s and 40s, even 50s, embrace. They want freedom. To them, they want to say, well, I want to make the decision when I make the decision. I don't want you to tell me when I need to make the decision. Right? So that decline, number of subscribers, with smaller organizations, number of subscribers stayed pretty flat. But man, in the bigger organizations and medium, they were hemorrhaging subscribers, especially after the pandemic, because some people said, we were subscribers for many years, but we'll just buy single tickets because we know that there'll be seats available since you're not selling out. So that's a tough challenge to have. Growth is primarily in non-classical concerts. I mentioned this, but here's the data to prove it. If you look in that left column under classical percent change, some of the big orchestras that you know and respect and love, the National Symphony, the Pittsburgh, Detroit, Seattle, Nashville, Indianapolis, Milwaukee, St. Paul, all of them had pretty deep declines in classical audiences between 07, 08 and 17, 18, right? Now, are they slowly coming back? Yes, but it's going to take a lot of time, and that is not going to be the magic bullet to save us. We've got to work in more pops programming and stuff that's going to bring in the people in their 30s and 40s. We got to have a balanced menu, right? Meat and potatoes, but also some broccoli, right? So if the right column, you can see those are the pops concerts. Look at the growth in the pops concerts. 39%, 32, 119% from Seattle. They must have launched a full pop series, right? Nashville, Indianapolis. So you can see the growth is not really in classical. It's in those other concerts, whether it's movie with music, whether it's the Cirque du Soleil type with acrobats and stuff, whether it's partnering with a local rock band and creating scores for that. That's where the growth is. All right, now let's talk about what's happening currently. I will start by saying that I do not factor in politics in my job. It is not, I don't care who people voted for. I don't come to work every day wanting to make a political statement. The arts are for everyone. Music is politically blind. What I am saying is that this is what's happening, and it's scaring us, because when you decide to suddenly swing the pendulum the other way and say we are not looking for diversity or equity or inclusion, that scares me, because what it's saying is that the resources that we have dumped into for the past 10 years to try and make DEI a priority in our art form, and let's face it, orchestras, right, have traditionally been a white European art form, right? If you look at any orchestra, do you see a ton of color in there? No, right? Because a lot of it has been from the decline of arts education in schools, and Europe put a lot more emphasis on music education than we did in the US. And so a lot of our orchestra members have European backgrounds, right? Or they came from Europe just to be in our orchestra. Look at the New York Philharmonic. There's a lot of Europeans and Asians there because they placed more emphasis on that, right? So this whole idea of the new administration saying, you know what, we're no longer putting DEI as a priority. Well, how's that going to impact us as orchestras, right? Because we've mobilized a ton of effort, because in the past 5-10 years, foundations, corporate support have all said, show me you're going to be diverse, show me you're going to be equitable, show me you're going to be accessible, right? We want you to be the music for the people, right? Now the pendulum swung the other way, and it's hard to address that, right, on a dime. Very hard to address that. The other one is this whole idea of, you know what, the arts don't matter. The arts don't matter. We need to save money. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to take that 2.5 million that we gave to orchestras, and they're not going to get it. That's a real challenge budgeting wise, because guess what? That's a lot of money to replace. So that whole idea of just dissolving the arts committee and sending the message that, you know what, we don't place value in arts, in performing, or the arts in general, is tough. It's going to be a tough fight if that happens. Now, it hasn't happened yet, but we have to mobilize. We have to be prepared for that. Where are we going to find that money? That's a lot of money. The other factor is, you have these two different streams. You've got state funding and you've got federal funding, right? If federal funding is decreasing, state funding is probably going to decrease as well, because a third of a state's budget comes from federal funds. So it's a double whammy, right? Not only are we going to get, we're not going to get that federal funding, but the state funding that we usually count on is in jeopardy now too. So that's a torpedo. If it hits our hull, we have to be ready, for sure. So it's not all doom and gloom. So no matter the challenges we are facing, music has lived on. It will live. Some great quotes that I kind of try to live by. Plato, I love this. I would teach children music, physics, and philosophy, but most importantly, music. For the patterns in music and all the arts are the keys to learning. So big deal. Henry Longfellow, he actually went to Bowdoin College, believe it or not, where I went. Music is the universal language of mankind. Why do you think they played music when the Berlin Wall was ripped down? Because it's the unspoken connection to humanity. Where words fail, music speaks. Hans Christian Andersen. Music expresses that which cannot be put into words, and that which cannot remain silent. I like that one, right? Bernstein said the loudest instrument in the orchestra is silence. And then music is the divine messenger between heaven and the human. Beethoven, gotta have a Beethoven. Since you heard Beethoven, I had to put a Beethoven quote in here. But it's not all doom and gloom. We will survive. We will pivot. We will meet these challenges head on. Thank you guys. Questions? I know we've got some time, so hit me with every question you want. Yes, sir.
All my life I was in Wisconsin, near Madison, Wisconsin, and we were patrons of that symphony. Their concerts they have 3 of each concert. They have a Friday night concert, a Saturday night concert, a Sunday matinee. And I can only assume that on economy of scale, it's easier for that organization to absorb administration costs and to have a higher ticket revenue when they have 3 of each concert as opposed to 1. It's more of a particular challenge, I think, for a small orchestra, having just 1 concert. Is that?
So yeah, so the question is for all of our listeners digitally is it easier to maximize on revenue if you have multiple concerts of the same production, or do you put all your eggs in one basket and say, hey, Friday night is the night. If you want to see this concert, come Friday night. So there are 2 answers to that question. Number one is, if you are paying a high price to rent that performance hall, if you don't own that performance hall, then it is very costly to do multiple concerts over multiple days, because guess what? They're going to charge you every single time, every single performance, right? Now, you can try and argue to do a back-to-back, meaning you're going to do a matinee at 1 o'clock and an evening at 7 o'clock, right? But most halls got smart and said, no, you're going to be charged for 2 performances, right? So if you own your concert hall, amen to that, right? Because rehearsals, right? You can have 2 or 3 rehearsals and then 2 or 3 concerts, and the musicians are prepared and you're ready, right? Because it's the same program, right? You don't have to add rehearsals because they'll be ready. If they can do it Friday night, they can do it Saturday afternoon, and they can do it Sunday afternoon, right? So if you own your hall, you'll see that a lot of orchestras, if they own their hall and they're not paying a ton for the ushers and the stagehands and all that other stuff that goes behind the scenes that you don't really think about in terms of costs, then they can do those multiple dates. And yes, they can maximize because, they're not paying for the space. They're not paying for the stagehands. They're not paying for. But if you rent your hall like we do from Hope College, we better have some serious ticket sales to cover both those concerts. And we better get some corporate sponsors and some wallets need to open to have multiple concerts. Now, with Midori, which Sarah, told you about, we were very lucky and secured a world-class violinist who is coming. We said, you know what? She is of the caliber where we think we can do 2. Same thing with our holiday concert, right? We do 2. because we know that we can bring in enough ticket revenue to break even. So there's your answer to that question. Other questions? Right over here.
So given the statistics you indicated at first about the aging population
Correct.
and the reality that the older people are the ones that prefer the classical.
Right.
Do you see most orchestras, including Holland, trending toward a more even balance of pops and stuff that appeals to young people?
Yes. Yes. But the key is that you have to continue to maintain artistic excellence on the classical side. You cannot add pops to the detriment, to the detriment of your classical, right? That's the trick. And also you got to balance budget, and those pops concerts are expensive, right? Most of those are much more expensive than your classical because you're adding the video screen and the rights to that, right? So those also have higher ticket prices. If you look, classical is usually the lowest ticket price, and Star Wars or Harry Potter or Cirque du Soleil is going to be a lot more expensive. Why? Because you have to raise it to cover the costs. Now, the advantage is you're going to have a very different audience coming in there to that Star Wars and that Harry Potter and all that than your classical audience, right? And so by growing your database and having more names and more email addresses, those are more people to reach out and ask for help to solicit, to fundraise with, right? And the hope is that as they start falling in love with you, right? It's almost like the dating game, right? That the story is to secure a subscriber, they usually have to come to 3 or 5 concerts before they're going to actually say, all right, I'll be a season ticket holder. And then to get them to open their wallet and start being a donor, it's usually 1 or 2 years of being a season ticket buyer before they significantly start opening their wallet to say, yeah, I'm going to support this. But you got to invest in your future. And if you're only marketing to the same people over and over and over again, you're not growing, you're actually dying because those people age out. So those new concerts are a way to grow your database. That's a good question.
It's really interesting, but when we started Holland Symphony, no one was paid.
Right.
And it was an all volunteer orchestra, and we started paying musicians by paying for the classical concerts. No, paying for the pops concerts, because all the musicians wanted to play the classical concert,
Right.
and no one wanted to play for
Mhm.
the pops concert, and we couldn't get musicians to play for
Right.
the pops concerts.
Right.
So we started paying for the classical concerts first, and gradually now everyone is paid
Right.
for all the services. Another interesting thing is statistically, Holland is way out of line in terms of subscription sales.
Mhm.
80% of our ticket sales are subscription. And we're routinely selling out at the Jack Miller, which is a problem because that's 800 seats. Well, what do? We don't have enough ticket sales to generate 2 concerts and 2 rentals and
Right.
2 of everything.
Right.
So that's a dilemma for Holland Symphony.
Correct. Yeah. And I mean, it's a tribute to Kay's leadership. And that is, there are not any orchestras I've ever worked for where you go and you're not panicking because there's going to be empty seats. Not here. It's unbelievable. But yes, we have an inventory problem. We don't have enough seats, right? That's a challenge. Now, West Ottawa has this new performing arts center. We are going to rehearse there in March to test the acoustics. We'll test drive it. We'll see what it's like, but that would give us 200 more seats per concert, which might be nice. So instead of 800 seats, it's 1,000 seats. We may shift gears a little bit because that is a dilemma that Holland Symphony. It's a good problem to have. It's just a challenge, right? And then the other challenge that Kay mentioned is how do you incentivize your musicians to want to play the pops and the classical? Because traditionally musicians want to play the hard classical stuff. That to them, that's what they really want to do. They don't want to play Billie Holiday or this or that or pops or stuff like that. To them, that's a little bit boring. Not to the audience, of course, but to the real to the musicians who want to challenge themselves, right? And the way to do that is to really say, hey, look, you have to play pops if you want to play classical, right? Do you have the luxury of that all the time? Sometimes not, right? Depends on the dates, depends on the time. There are two types of orchestras, right? There are orchestras who are union, right? The big tier 1, 2, 3, 4 are mostly union. Those musicians are in a union, they sign a contract, their contract says that they get X amount of performances a year, and that's what they're promised, and off you go. With smaller organizations, Holland included, it's a per service, right? So you're getting paid per rehearsal and per concert. You don't lock in X amount of stuff, and you don't have a union constantly coming every 3 years and saying, all right, you're gonna have to pay us more. And that is a really tough thing. You've heard about orchestras completely shutting down because the union goes on strike. The union goes to them and says, we're going to renegotiate our contract, right? You heard about Chicago Symphony. They went through it. Philadelphia went through it. New York Phil went through it, where if the organization can't balance the budget and meet the demands of the union then goes on strike and says, okay, well, no dough, no show. Suddenly, that's a huge dilemma, because then as a nonprofit administrator, I'm trying to figure out, okay, well, I can't really pay the orchestra what they want, and I can't just crank up ticket prices to an astronomical level because we won't sell them at that. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge. Any other questions? I love them. These are really great questions.
Michael, I do have one. So
Yes.
do you think things like blind auditions and broadening the orchestral repertoire to include more works by people of color are here to stay in
Yes,
spite of what we're seeing nationally?
correct. So I think orchestras are going to shift in terms of the terminology that they use, right? I mean, I had a friend of mine send me this document that he called buzzwords, because he heard that certain foundations and corporations were using artificial intelligence to sort their funding applications based on certain words that were in it. Don't say diversity, don't say equity, don't say inclusion, because you'll land in the pile of, we're not going to fund them because we're worried about those buzzwords. So are we going to shift? Yes, but we're never going to stop bringing diverse music from all different types of backgrounds and cultures, because music is colorblind, right? Full stop. We've invested too much into this mission of broadening our reach. We want to go into these communities that don't know us, right? We want to have everyone in those concert halls. Look at what happened in that shopping mall, right? You had everybody in there, from kids dancing around to music can touch everybody. We just have to figure out a way to make it work financially. It's a good question.
Kind of a personal thing of mine, but do you think that just lightening up the mood, and by that I mean, I am a big fan of the Vienna Philharmonic, and I love watching their concerts, and I especially love when they do Radzetsky's March,
Yes.
and the audience
Yeah.
starts to applaud and clap with it.
Yeah.
I feel personally that if we were to add in a few more things like that, and I know West Michigan's a tough nut to crack,
Right.
but I mean, I feel like that would change the perception. The music is still difficult, it's Tchaikovsky, but lighten up the mood a little bit for the audience
Yeah.
and let them feel a little bit more involved, feel like they're participating,
Yes.
anticipating some joy at the concert.
Yeah, I agree with you, right? The idea of making it more accessible in terms of using humor and wit and stuff. I mean, the Brits do that all the time, right? Another good shift that we're seeing is conductors talking to audience, right? That idea of a conductor saying, hey, here's why I put Florence Price on this program. And I want you to listen for that horn call, because that's actually a taxi horn that she heard outside her, her window in Chicago, right? Explaining to you all the really cool things about the music that you're going to hear in human terms from the person on the stage, so that you don't have to bury your nose in your program notes to know what's going on, right? I also like some of the artists who will speak from the stage, those violinists, those pianists who say, oh, before I start, here's a funny story about this piece, or here's why I do this program, or hey, you know what, we're going to let the audience pick right? Holland Symphony allowed the audiences to vote every year to vote on what piece, one of the pieces for the last concert, right? The idea of saying, you know, we're going to put it in your hands of what we want to play. Here are 6 different options you pick. This year they picked Sibelius's Finlandia. I thought they were going to pick the Beethoven Overture, but no, everybody voted and they picked Sibelius, which is great. I love that piece. But the idea of getting the audience more involved and a social component is a way of breaking down that barrier between the folks on the stage and the conductor on the podium and the audience, because every single person in there plays a role. The audience plays a critical role. We all know that if you're in an audience that isn't having fun and isn't enjoying the music, it's not a good feeling. Versus some of those concerts where everybody is on their feet because it was just so amazing. Those are what creates the buzz, right? But that's a good point. Other questions? Do we have any questions online? I know a lot of people are on Zoom and virtuals. No virtual questions? Oh, we got one in the back.
There was a list of orchestras that got money from the state.
Yes,
Holland was not one of them. Why not?
correct. I don't know. I emailed a couple times asking. Now we did get, so the Michigan Arts and Culture Council, who are, a lot of their funding comes from the National Endowment of the Arts. We did get a nice chunk from them, but the labor and economic, right? That's what you're talking about, the Leo grant from the state. We filled all of that out and I never got an answer and I emailed several times. I don't know what criteria they used and whether they said, hey, you know, if they jumped into our 990 and saw, oh, Holland's doing really well financially, that may be how they did it. I don't know. If anyone can find the answer, let me know. But we worked pretty hard on that application. They also make it harder and harder every year. And I mean, Kay will agree with me that the NEA, because of the threat to cut federal funding, the NEA bumped up their grant application deadline. It's now in 2 weeks, basically, right? It used to be way later in the season. So my weekend's going to be gone because I'm going to be in NEA grant mode. But the point is, I think they did it because they're worried the funding's going to be pulled. So they'd rather get the money out the door as quick as they can. But you know what they said is they said, hey, be prepared for 26 to 30 hours of work. Really? For the organization who has one full-time employee, I'm going to have to set aside 26 to 30 hours. Who else? Who's going to run the orchestra? Who's going to be the marketing person or the development person? They don't think about that, right? 30 hours. But we have to do it somehow, right? Question, Doug.
I just was curious as to how you feel about the digital sources and using that to increase our audience size by having paid streaming or
Right.
things like that. Is there a future for that for our orchestra?
There is a future for that. The digital, so the question is there a future for us to invest in digital streaming, digital platforms? Of course there is. The key is getting more media. So for example, we're going to record our Link Up concert, which will be great because we need to secure more funding for our Link Up program. So we're going to video the whole thing. The kids having fun with their recorders, right? Them running off the buses into the, you know, because then we can restream it. We can chop it up and we can put it in social media posts, right? But if you don't have good video content to start with, streaming's not going to matter, right? Second thing is investing in the real pros of digital marketing. So we partner with Local IQ, and they are very, very good at making sure our ads pop up when they want through Google and all those other search engines, right? Because ideally, you would want, oh, well, let me type in piano concert. And if I live in Holland, our ad should pop up. Oh my gosh, oh, Holland Symphony, there's a piano concerto happening, right? The only way to do that is to have a lot of very savvy digital marketing folks making sure that that AdWord, that Google AdWord is in your cache so that way when they type it in, the algorithm goes in and sees where they live, right? Because believe it or not, your IP address tells people where you live most of the time, right? So the smart marketer says, okay, for 50-mile radius, I want to make sure that if you type in piano concert, that my ad comes up on the sides of Google or on the sides of Yahoo or Bing or whatever search engine you're using. All right. But you have to have that good content. You have to be able to, when they click it, a video's got to come on, a really great engaging picture's got to come on. Your website has to work flawlessly so that they can purchase a ticket in 3 clicks or less. You don't want them zooming around your website to find something and then get frustrated or distracted, or the dog needs to go out and they leave, right? So it's, yes, digital is upon us, especially mobile. I mean, how many times do you get on your phone and you get to a website that's not mobilely optimized and you can't do what you need to do? That costs money, right? People have to design those websites to make sure that it works on your tablet or your phone. Or so digital is here to stay, and we are going to invest in it. We just have to do it gradually because, like I said, that budget's still there. That's a good question, Doug. Another question over here.
Not really a question, but I think it's something that we need to toot our own horn on, is the summer concert at Colin Park.
Yes.
Kay really got it started and you've
Mhm.
picked it up, and, diversity, equity, inclusion, we're not using those buzzwords. It's more cultural inclusiveness.
Yeah.
But we have done a remarkable job, and it is in our DNA. It's not
Yep.
going to go away. But I think people would like to hear a little bit of the backstory of how we chose the musicians and got the music composed to do it,
Right.
because it's not something we pulled off a shelf.
No, this has been in the tank for 10 years at least. The idea of going and finding musicians who are local, who are not huge names, who have a diverse range of instruments, right? I mean, you can go from the harpsichord or squeeze box player to the singer to the guitarist to, right? The idea of hand picking local artists to be on that stage with the orchestra. And then why don't you find a local composer who can orchestrate the music so that way that soloist and the orchestra can play together? And that's exactly what that community concert is now about. It's about finding local talent and talent that are not normally going into Jack Miller Concert Hall, right? To perform with a full orchestra, because most of the time those performers could never afford to hire a full orchestra, right? But most of the time that those types of musicians speak to different cultures and different neighborhoods, right? And so suddenly you are getting people from other neighborhoods coming to this free concert. And what's more accessible than a park right on the water, right? Perfect. And what's even better is if it's nice weather, there's no snow barriers, no parking barriers, right? And let's add some food trucks. Great. We're going to have 4 or 5 food trucks there from local folks so that way you can buy your pizza and your barbecue and whatever you want and sit down in your lounger chair and hear not only the symphony orchestra, but someone new, someone you've never heard before, right? That's that whole concept. And to me, it's not DEI, it's community engagement, right? It's community. Community doesn't have a color, doesn't have right? Community is everybody. It's all of us, right? So the idea of making sure we have a free concert where everyone can come, and it's going to be a lot of diverse music, and we spice it up. We invite dancers so that there'll be a dancing component where we'll have people doing dance lessons and stuff. Next year, we're going to have a muralist, an artist join us, and he'll be painting while the music is going. It's going to be a really fun event. And the idea is, again, that's breaking the barrier down and spreading our reach and the kind of healing and transformative power of live music, right? And there was over 1,500 people last year. I think it can grow, for sure. Music unites us is the tagline. Yes, that's a good point. We work very hard for that community concert, and we'll continue to work hard because people expect it of us. That's our duty. It's fun. Yes, it is fun to watch kids running around and yeah, people enjoying themselves, and yeah, it's a lot of work, but it's fun. Other questions, anyone?
I think that's a good place to end.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Boom.
Let's thank
Thank
Michael one
you
more
very
time.
much. Thank you. This was an honor.